All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for being with us today. Today I have Duke Worthington with me. Duke's an author, a speaker, business and life coach, a master pickleball player, as I understand it. Is that right, Duke?
Have been at one time, but it's been a while.
All right. Well, yeah, and you're a runner, though, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So you stay in shape, you stay physically fit, you keep yourself going physically and mentally.
I do, and I think it's something very important to talk about showing up for others, but a big part of that is also how we show up for ourselves. And yep, I go out to Colorado and run usually a half marathon trail race with my son-in-law. We started that when I turned 60, and so we've been doing that for a few years now. And it's a neat goal to shoot for every year. And he's wanting to go a little further distances. But I'm not sure whether we'll do that, but we'll see. It's interesting. So I may go a little further. We're talking about a 50K and maybe go a little further. So
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. Good for you though. Good for you. That's awesome. So hey, again, thanks. I really appreciate you being here. We've known each other for a while, but for folks who don't know you, would you just give a little bit of your history, of your background, how you came to be at the spot you are now and doing what you now do?
Sure. And I've shared this before, and the fortune or good fortune, I'm not real sure how that goes, but I realized after a couple divorces that I was doing a poor job of showing up for those most significant in my life. And I had begun as a life coach and certified, had been consulting and been speaking for years before that on the communication process. But again, after you go through a couple of big things in your life, such as divorce, I really started digging a little deeper as to what was going on. And through my research and working with clients and amazing mentors and coaches that I had and research, I realized that showing up is a huge part that so many of us think we are, as I did for many years. I was married, first marriage for 23 years. But I realized how poorly I showed up for my children, how poorly I showed up for my spouse. And what I mean by that is I've come to believe with all my heart that the greatest gift that any one person can give another is to give that person the opportunity to be seen and heard. And I raised my kids in a way that I thought was best for them, as many of us do, I think, and tried to point them in directions that I thought would allow them to be most successful. When doing that, though, we often aren't paying attention to them. And that's what I learned. And they've all turned out wonderfully in spite of me. But, and I think we've talked on paper, I look good. I was, the good husband, had a good job on school board, was a scoutmaster, was involved in the community, went to the events and did things with them. But rarely when I look back did I actually sit down and listen to them and hear them. And I'll give you an example of what I mean.
Okay. And then I've got a question for you about that. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And keep me on track and reel me in when you need to. I totally understand that. But one of the things I notice is that we have a tendency as parents to question our kids or to question what they think is one thing when we want to tell them it's another. And a very simple example of that is if you have a younger child, and especially now with the coronavirus and so many people being stuck at home and having to do the school work with them and things such as that. I heard someone say that their child told them that they were mean. They told their mom that you're mean, Mom. And she was pushing them pretty hard to get some work done, which they didn't want to do because they were home. But her response was, I'm not mean. I'm not being mean to you. I just want you. And so what happened in that instant was they didn't take the time to understand where their child was. What does mean to you? What does it mean when you call me mean like that? And find out what it means to that child. What we're actually doing is telling them, you don't know what you're thinking about and what you're talking about. You don't understand. So I'm going to straighten you out and tell you what mean is. And I'm not mean, because that's the worst thing we want to hear as a parent, of course. But if we can slow down and really show up for them in a way that they can be seen and heard, that's a wonderful opportunity. Rather than correcting them and making them wrong, which is what that does. And by the way, you said author. Yes, I've got a book coming out later on this summer titled "The Rightness Syndrome," and it's about how our need to be right sabotages our relationships and limits our opportunities for happiness. And so that's a great example of being able to show up for someone when normally we would just say, "No, I'm not mean, and here's why I'm telling you this," and we justify it and move on.
Yeah, makes total sense. And the question I said I've got is this:
Yeah.
you mentioned how that for years, in retrospect,
Yes.
you looked back and you saw I wasn't really showing up in the way that I should for my family.
Yes.
I'm curious, what was your feeling in that present moment during those 20 years? Did you sense something was off, or were you just kind of chugging on down the road and feeling like, yeah, things are going just fine?
Wow, what a wonderful and powerful question. And to answer that, I think I had a sense in many things that I did. I was involved in a lot of sales position and sales management, and I would realize back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, we learned a lot of ways that I look back now that I would call um, psychological arm wrestling. We would learn ways to counter responses and things such as that. And you can answer every question with a question. And there were lots of things that we did back then that people don't put up with as much anymore. They're a lot more savvy and they don't put up with those things. But whenever I did that, and I'll get back to answer your question, whenever I did those types of things, it was what I was being taught and what I thought would get me to the end result. And so I would do them, but I always felt a little off. And so the same thing with my kids. If I would get on them, and I could be a bit of an that's putting it lightly. I could be an authoritarian. We'll just say that.
Sure.
I was a sergeant in the Army, and so raising I had a tendency to do a little bit of that,
Sure.
which is not showing up for them. But yes, I felt it's like when we get into an argument. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It never feels right. You may think you feel okay because you won, but the reality is in just a short period of time after that, there's an emptiness in you. Even though you think you won, there's an emptiness. And that's what, to answer your question, with my kids and with my wife at the time, it always felt a little off whenever I was that authoritarian, or I was telling them the right way to do it, or the best way, or whatever I thought my opinion was. And so I rarely took the time to find out where they were, what their thoughts and opinions were. And the amazing thing is 2, 3-year-old kids have their own opinions.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
The terrible twos we talk about. So we forget, even at those young ages, to slow down and take the time to really listen to them and pay attention. And it's not to let them get away with stuff. It's not to have boundaries set for them and discipline, so to speak, in what we do. Structure is actually, I'm not a fan of boundaries. Structure for our children makes a difference. But to show up for them and allow them to be seen and heard is huge. So it was a long answer to an easy question, but yes, I sensed something was off, and it took me a long time to figure it out, which I think is what makes grandparenting so wonderful, is that we're not trying to fix our grandkids. We're not trying to teach them. We're just there to truly enjoy them. And that makes such a difference, as most of us remember our grandparents, for the majority of us, were pretty darn special.
Absolutely.
Because they just showed up and loved us.
Absolutely. It's one of the great joys of being either a grandparent or a grandchild, isn't it?
Yeah, both ends of it. It's awesome. So did that answer the question for you?
It does. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's right on, spot on. So if we could kind of fast forward a bit to our current situation, I'm curious as to your take on, during this current COVID-19, stay-at-home orders, those sort of things. What do you see as additional challenges for families? What do you see as additional opportunities?
Well, it's another great question. It's right in line with what I just shared. Our ability to slow down right now and to really pay attention to those closest to us, which right now are extremely close to us for an extended period of time, which many of us haven't dealt with because we've been busy in our lives and doing other things. So we're in situations now where some of us who have the luxury of working from home are spending more time, but still trying to find that balance. And for some I've talked to, it's actually been tougher for them. They're trying to find that time to work and to spend time with their family. And what I'm finding is slowing down, taking a step back, and begin to prioritize. It's actually an amazing opportunity to really go deeper with your family. I, I many people have heard about gratitude journals and the power that those offer. And I've talked to some of my clients before and have done those myself. But what I've begun to do with many clients is I have them also do an attributes journal. And what I mean by that is it could be your spouse, it could be a teenage child who may be a little challenging. We have a tendency to focus on what our frustration is with those individuals. And when we do that, our mind is designed to find ways to validate our belief. And so what happens is we see more and more and more things that are challenging and frustrating to us.
We become proficient at finding those chinks in the armor. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, we do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when I get them to start doing an attributes journal, I just have them every morning or every night, a lot of times in the evening. They'll just sit down and I say, write 3 things, 3 different things. You can't use the same 3 ones, but start digging in and write as many as you want. But if you just start that habit of writing 3 things that are attributes of a significant other, of something special about them, it could be anything, just that, you know, they listened to me today, you know, or they slowed down what they were doing and followed a request. They picked up their clothes or whatever it is, you know. Just write some things down that make a difference. And soon your mind will begin to look for other things. So sometimes my clients will say, I couldn't come up with 3 things today I liked about my husband, or, you know, which is comical. But once they start looking for those things, they find them. This is a great opportunity with all the time we're spending together to really start looking at why those children we have are so amazing, why that spouse that you've chosen to spend your life with really is amazing. And so does that give you a direction on that?
Absolutely. That's spectacular. I think that's a good note for us to end on. And I tell you what, and that's something we had not discussed before. I'm going to put into practice. So this has been terrific for me. Thank you. I appreciate it. My spouse will appreciate it as well. So Duke, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insight.
It's my pleasure, Tim, and thank you so much for doing this. It's great that you've thought of the others to be able to put these together and offer those to those who are interested. So thank you very much.